Hello, little creatures. Welcome to Lugal's World, episode 5. We're here with Isaac Middle from Down the Wombat Hole blog. Please check out his blog. And we're going to be discussing, very plutonic, exciting stuff that is boiling over in our heart and soul. And put your apocalypse tinfoil hats on, everyone. It's about to get very feisty.
Cool. Should we just launch into it?
Absolutely.
Nice. So the more I've gotten into astrology, I've been sort of looking at how astrology can predict certain large events or potentially future events. And so one of the first things I realized was how closely or how accurately that astrology predicted the words we use, the pandemic in 2020, or the global bug, maybe we can call it. And there was a really significant conjunction, and series of conjunctions would happen basically from the December 2019 to about March of 2020, which was when the bug sort of rolled out and really sort of took control, and when we went into the sort of global shutdowns, which is pretty much the end of March. So it's really cool to sort of see how the series of conjunctions all sort of lined up and basically played out as the start of the bug played out. And so since then, I've sort of been going a bit deeper and trying to sort of fit sort of events and astrology into this sort of overall astrotheology context, which is the idea that spiritual, even religious texts sort of derived in some way from the stars and from really significant constellational arrangements and planetary arrangements. And then I sort of started to sort of pull together this overall sort of like story about how astrology might have predicted the unfoldment of the apocalypse, or what we understand as the apocalypse from Revelations. And so I thought I'd just chuck it out there, and we can sort of just see how it lands, and see if I'm making any sense. I guess the overall point is if we think about like what an apocalypse is, it is an unveiling or a revelation, hence the name Revelation that it's contained in, because it is the revealing of information which has been suppressed or kept hidden about the true nature of our world. And if we're going to think of a planetary archetype about the idea of revelation, it's Pluto. And it's probably why me and Colin enjoy talking about this stuff so much, as we have a very strong Platonic dimension of us, which just wants to reveal the true nature of what's going on to people in sometimes a quite provocative way, but that's what we feel motivated to do. So we sort of really found a mutual interest over this. So we've got Pluto. We can understand Pluto fundamentally as the sort of revelatory archetype, I guess. And we think of what else would make a sort of a apocalyptic experience. So we have this idea of revealing something, but then if we think about what the point of the apocalypse is in Revelations, which itself is sort of drawn from a whole bunch of different, well, not drawn, but I guess mirrors the stories in other texts, including particularly the Gnostic texts, which were around then. So there's a quite close parallels, different groups of people saying the same story, saying the same archetypal journey or experience, which is, and if we bring in astrotheology, we can then say, well, were they sort of describing events in the sky? And I sort of think that. And if we go to one of the main, I guess, we call it the main signs that Revelations was something to do with astrotheology was September 23, 2017. I think we talked about this before, Colin. It was the great sign in the sky. So as a great sign appeared in the sky, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was with child and wailed aloud in pain as she labored to give birth. She gave birth to a son, a male child, destined to rule the nations with an iron rod. And then a lot of people around, like leading up to 2017, saw this configuration coming up, where a whole bunch of planets would be arranged basically across sidereal constellations of Leo and Virgo, so the Lion and the Maiden. And again, so we sort of this woman clothed with the sun, and so Virgo season sidereally is sort of roughly around August, September, because that's when the sun is in the constellation of Virgo. And on sort of September 23, 2017, there was this lineup of Mercury, Venus, and Mars, all in the constellation of Leo, which has 9 stars. So then you've got 12 luminaries, all above the constellation of Virgo, the Maiden, and then you had the moon essentially on the 23rd coming to be at her feet, almost like looking like something was being given birth. And so people basically said, oh, like this matches the sign in Revelation 12, I think it was. And so there's all this apocalyptic stuff happening, and then nothing happened on the day. But I'd say the point is that no, it was a sign in astrotheology that you are now entering into this potentially like revelatory period. So it wasn't ever going to be a huge event. It was just a sign. It's a sign for people who are aware and who are looking for signs about what's going on, that you are potentially entering this time. And so if we think about the apocalypse in Revelations, the point is to wake people up, to wake spiritually minded people like us. We'd like to think that we're spiritually minded, up to the nature of the world that we live in, which, if we take the biblical narrative, is that it's ruled by Satan, or by a negative force, I guess. It's essentially a fallen world. And so to understand how to sort of live in a spiritual way, you need to start from that basis to understand the fundamental sort of spiritual nature of the world that we live in. And so bring it back to astrology, what would be the archetype of Satan?
Saturn.
Yes.
Not the fabric, not satin.
Yes. So I've come up, if we're going to have an apocalypse, or at least this process of going through the 7 seals, the first of which are sort of the 4 horsemen. So we say the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, but they're signs that we're moving towards this apocalyptic period. So we're being woken up by the horsemen, or by the unfoldment of the seals, which have given us information to let us realize what's happening and let us understand the world and why it's heading in a certain direction. And as we sort of film this, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world geopolitically, which isn't particularly promising. Things are very heated, things are very tense, and we might get to potentially why at the end of this chat. But just to sort of bring back, so we've got Pluto as the sort of revelation, and then we've got Saturn as the adversarial, almost like archonic force. And it just so happened that in 2020, basically in January, we had a 1 in sort of 30-ish, 35-ish year conjunction between Saturn and Pluto. So essentially we had the start of this Saturn-Pluto cycle, which lasts for anywhere between 30 to 40 years. Just Pluto does some weird things with its orbit. It can move fast and move slow. But, let's say roughly 1 in 35 years. So a very significant event. And, we might say one of the most powerful and potentially challenging combinations of planets you can have, Pluto and Saturn. So this happened essentially over the course of late 2019 and early 2020. We had this very monumental Saturn-Pluto conjunction. The revelation of the adversary is one way to literally spell that out. So we sort of have this this 1 in 30-ish year conjunction between the revealer, Pluto, and the adversary, or the sort of satanic, I guess, force from an astrological perspective, coming together and basically playing out over the end of 2019, start of 2020. But we have 2 other planets sort of join in. We have Jupiter, and then we have Mars, and they both come in at the start of 2020 to make conjunctions both with Pluto and Saturn. So what does this bring? Mars is the planet of war. It's about fighting, asserting oneself, but it's sort of the archetype of violence, of destruction, of
Oh my! You know what I just dreamed this morning?
what?
It was nonstop war, just like, but it was like crazy because there was like an AI soldier or something, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm on your guys' side," but he was like killing, like behind the scenes, like killing people, and it was like real crazy, just endless warfare. I used to have a while back ago, just nonstop violence dreams, in terms of like wars or intergalactic wars, and now they're starting to pop up now, which is not normal for me. It was interesting that I had the most of them when I was very fundamentalist Christian. So kind of Saturn reminds me of Saturn, like the Crusades or that kind of Saturnian death energy too.
So that wow. But that's sort of, it's interesting because that's sort of the imprint that was made upon the period of time that we are now. It's almost like none of us are going to be able to state the reality of Mars or this energy of destruction and sort of like tendency towards warlike behavior. So that was sort of when Mars came in, it sort of imprinted its sort of archetype onto this revelation, onto this sort of revelatory period. But then also Jupiter was there as well, and Jupiter basically makes a conjunction with Pluto on the same day that Mars makes a conjunction with Saturn. So we have the two malefics, Mars and Saturn conjunction, just as Jupiter joins Pluto. And so Jupiter brings this religious vibe to the whole thing, because Jupiter is the planet which gives things meaning and allows us to understand and put into context something into our own lives, into our own experience. And so that's why we associate Jupiter as being a benefic, the great benefic, and things to do with faith, with hope, with optimism, with expansion, with growth, with wealth, because it's the planet which brings meaning and clarity to something. And so that's ultimately why we have, religion and spiritual practices, because we need a way to find or derive meaning from the world. So it's interesting that we also have Jupiter just bringing this dimension of faith and religiosity and what it is to sort of be a spiritual person. So you've got these four planets all combining into and putting into place this really interesting, like, apocalyptic war, but also fundamentally religious, sort of archetypal sort of mixing pot. So it's really interesting, and this all plays out.
Reminds me of the show Raised by Wolves, which was actually taken down. It's the same guy who made that movie about Noah, and it was the atheists versus the religious people, and then they destroyed the world. They moved to another planet, and there was this, it was very evolutionary. They had one side devolving humans, the other side evolving humans, AI, non-AI. I highly recommend that show to anyone who likes those topics. Yeah, because we are, modern society, we like to think we've moved past religion, but I think it's just heating up, kind of. From when I was in fundamentalism, a lot of the fundamentalists talked about the third great awakening, that they'll be like, and it seems like with Trump, my theory is that it'll be all red, like everything will be all red. So with that will be like the most religious fervor we've probably seen since, it was the most religious in the United States, I believe. I think it was in around the 30s or 40s is when they put like, what was it, God into the Pledge of Allegiance and a lot of other like very important Christianizing things. So it's been about maybe 100 years before we've had a real intense religious spine. So maybe that's part of what's going to happen, because when crises happen, people return to the great Saturn. Even in my own life, when things go wrong, I immediately appeal to Saturn. Right, I wear all black. I go and chant to Saturn. And for all you people listening, you can go to an Orthodox church if you wanna serve Saturn. I'm pretty omniist for all the religions. That's one way to worship. Or Islam, go to your local mosque if you want to pay homage to the great Saturn. Go to the Kaaba. So funny that I'm like believe in everything.
No, no, but that idea you had about this intensely religious period of time, like, yeah, I absolutely see that as well. And there might be some like negative manifestations, but also it can be a very intensely positive religious or like spiritual time as well for sort of people to redefine. And that's the Jupiter Pluto astrology. That's Jupiter Pluto is like the most intensely transformative idea of what it is to be a spiritual person, to have a religious mindset, in the sense that there is a spiritual realm, and that we interact with that. We're constantly interacting with that, whether we sort of realize it or not. And so Jupiter Pluto is the revelation of that, of what ultimately, that where we ultimately do define, where we find true meaning, which is not in the, I would say, not in the earthly plane, but in this sort of spiritual realm. So I love that, and I can see that happening. And so it's about, as we sort of see things get very plutonic in the world, we can sort of within us, as we're going through our own apocalyptic process of having the world be revealed to us, and we can we're all going to go through that in our own way. So it's important to not have judgment or think someone's sort of going too fast or too slow. I guess the idea is that the four horsemen, or the sort of seven seals, are sequential. So it sort of gradually allows us to sort of see certain things, and to then, I guess, act or sort of orientate our lives in a different way based on these revelations which come to us.
Part of what and following a lot of let's really look at the 10 years I spent in fundamentalism. Everything was about prophecy. Everything was about end times. So I have a pretty good picture from the material, I think, from some of those stuff. It seems like there'll be, because I don't discount a lot of it, there'll be pockets where the collective is at a certain level of consciousness, and they'll have authority over like the weather, over different things. And I talked to a friend who's from Africa on Discord the other day. He was telling me he noticed, like, in different parts of Africa where he would check the news, and different parts where he lived, there was a lot of like gang violence and like intensity. And it's like these hurricanes or these disasters would hit those specific areas. It's like Gaia's immune response knows where to hone in the missile, where to hone in, where do we need to clean up all this disharmony. It's just kind of, if you have a rash, you'll put some ointment on the rash. That's basically what Gaia's doing. So that's why every single day I talk to Gaia. I talk to her. I say, lead me and my friends, my family. Where do you want us to go? We're here to serve you in alignment with the solar fathers. We're here to align with you. And I think there will be, even in the Bible, it talks about 2/3 of the land, 1/3 of the trees are spared, 1/3 of the waters is spared. In Isaiah 24, it says, the earth totters and it vomits out its inhabitants like a drunkard. Few will be spared. It says some will be spared. That's implied. There are some rapes spared. There are some, and that's the 1/3. During my awakening, kept coming to me over and over was 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I think there'll be 1/3 of the earth, both physically and population. That's my theory, that will be spared. They'll definitely have their own awakening, but yeah, 1/3 is my bet.
Yeah, and you can see in practical terms how that could happen, because we have more natural disasters. We have a lot of potentially like World War III-ish sort of situations becoming more and more prevalent. So it's realistic to sort of prepare for those sort of possibilities or potentials. And again, if we just sort of see it, imagine or see that we are spiritual vehicles having a very material plutonic experience. It helps to make sense of these events and put them into context, and not sort of get too disheartened or just not get too sort of down or lose hope, I guess, in that there's still some sort of evolutionary process that is going on. So I've got one more bit of astrology to sort of bring in, just about this sort of idea and where we sort of might be in this process. So we had these 4 planets all coming together at the start of 2020, and you sort of see how these different conjunctions sort of matched the unfoldment of the bug, and then leading us into this year of 2020. And it's interesting, like the year 2020. So what do we associate with 2020? It's the idea of like clear vision, the idea about able to see something very clearly. So even the number, even the numerology of the year of Saturn Pluto is in itself revelatory, because it's saying this is a year you will be able to see clearly what is going on in the world. So a lot of things sort of like seem to come together to point to this year 2000, or to that year 2020, as the start of some sort of revelatory cycle. And because we had these 4 planets, we also had, it meant we have Jupiter and Saturn essentially conjuncting and starting their own cycle, which is a roughly 20-year cycle. So we have Saturn takes around 29 years, Jupiter takes 12, and so we sort of get this 20-year cycle where they sort of, Jupiter will gradually sort of catch up to Saturn, then pass it, and then Saturn will keep moving on. So we can essentially see the unfoldment of this 20-year Jupiter-Saturn cycle as something akin to how the 4 horsemen might look. Again, I'm not saying it's true, it just might be a helpful sort of way to sort of keep track of the world and to observe within this cycle. So if we think about astrology in a cycle, you have a conjunction of 2 planets, and then gradually they'll move on, and the fast moving planet will form a square a quarter of the way through that cycle, and then it will go a bit more. Halfway through the cycle will be an opposition, and then 3/4 will be another square. So essentially you get this cycle divided up into 4 broad distinct sort of like periods, I guess. So we'd expect roughly this cycle, these sort of peaks, or this sort of the testing points of this cycle to happen roughly every 4 to 5 years. If we look at the astrology right now, we're currently coming up to the first Jupiter-Saturn square of this cycle. So we're sort of at the first testing point of this like little revelatory cycle, I guess, if we sort of want to break it down into this 20-year period. So we can say, let's have some fun and sort of say that the unfoldment of the bug was sort of the first horseman. And we can sort of make a case, if you sort of look at what the text was. This is sort of one translation of what the first horseman would look like, or would take shape. It will be, and I looked, and behold, a horse, white, and sitting on it having a bow, and it was given.
Can I tell you something wild about the 4 horses?
Yeah.
Tell me the colors of the Palestinian flag.
Yeah, that's a good one, isn't it?
I don't know what that means though, but it's
yeah. So no, that's it. Yes, I mean, and it's interesting. We can see what's sort of going on in that region of the world, and how it seems to be very obviously pushing us towards the thing that we're talking about, and whether that's a natural process or some sort of guided one, who knows? But it does seem like that those events are really pushing us down that path. If we look at the text of the first horseman, there's this idea it's a white horse. this idea of a bow and arrow, and then also a crown, and he went forth overcoming and that he might conquer. So there's a lot of different, and again, I'm not a biblical expert, but if I can sort of come at this from an autistic sort of point of view, so the horse is white, so it's something to do with like white, or people wearing white, and they're, you know, in 2020 we suddenly found people who sort of wearing white, you know, like the lab coat sort of people suddenly came into power. We had all these sort of, you know, people wearing lab coats sort of doing TikTok dances and stuff like that, which is very interesting. I think in 2012, sort of at the Olympic opening ceremony, we had all this sort of like sort of symbolism about sort of people wearing white and sort of saving the world from this big, scary sort of Grim Reaper figure. So it's sort of like lots of this sort of imagery was sort of happening in these major world events. And then obviously we had like literally a white horse running across the river in France during the Olympic opening ceremony. So there's a lot of this sort of horseman imagery sort of like flying around in the world at the moment. I think in April, do you remember that story? There was like these horses in London escaped from maybe from the royal palace, and were just like running, these white horses just running through the streets of London, and one of them hit a bus and had blood, and so we had this horse like dripping with blood running through the streets of like London. It was so crazy. So it's like almost like there's just.
Did you hear about the white buffalo calf?
Oh no, please tell.
They've been waiting hundreds of years for this prophecy of the white buffalo calf to be born. And same with it's all these rare animals, like in Israel, that they've been waiting for the red heifer, like kind of these ginger cows and everything that are used in the sacrificial rituals in the temple that has been destroyed. So now that they now have the red heifers, so it'll be closer and closer for them rebuilding of the third temple, which is definitely needed for the end time stuff to play out. So there'll probably be some removal of certain important sites in Israel to make way for the third temple, and that'll be very controversial, obviously.
Yeah. So we're pretty close to that point now where we're going to, for sure. And so it's sort of so on that, you're right, we sort of that heifer stuff, it all seems to be sort of like, whether conscious or unconscious, where sort of society is sort of orientating itself in this direction. And I was thinking, so we're basically coming up to this first testing point, this first Jupiter-Saturn square, and it's basically going to go exact for the first time in the middle of August, and Mars will be exactly conjunct Jupiter then as well. So we'll have this square between Saturn and then Jupiter, Mars. So I think this is sort of going to be we're going to start to feel more of this sort of like horseman sort of vibe start to come out in the world. But it's going to be in the context, I think, astrologically, of this Jupiter-Saturn square, which is sort of this fundamental dynamic between wanting to expand and grow and do more and see more, with Saturn, which is just the restricting, disciplining force. So there's going to be a lot of tension over the next sort of few months, you know, as this square sort of, you know, gets stronger and then weaker, and then it will get stronger again as Jupiter retrogrades. And then, so yeah, I just thought I'd sort of end with that and say, astrologically, if we are in this sort of apocalyptic cycle, we're coming to the next sort of like crunch point, or the next sort of like horseman, I guess. And it was just funny as I was sort of like getting my head around this, and then the opening ceremony happened, and there was just like this sort of apocalyptic horse symbology like everywhere in it. So interesting times. But yeah, I just love how astrology can give us this sort of like archetypal framework to understand the times that we're living in. So yes, interesting stuff.
Very interesting. So let's talk about that thought I had last night.
Yes, yeah.
So I was listening to The Alchemist, which is one of my favorite YouTube channels. Go and tell her to be on my show if you're watching this. She talked about, she answered a question on her Q&A about how do souls graduate from Earth on a negative polarity timeline, basically, or on the negative polarity. And she says they lose, basically, that they stop having remorse or shame. This reminded me of what the scripture said, the Bible, on grieving the Holy Spirit. It's where you lose the conscience, you lose these kind of things, and then yeah, that's where you become more like reptile. You get stuck in a more developed form of the lower chakras. It's the removal of the heart, but also an increase of consciousness into the lower chakras. So more of harmonic intelligence, lower chakra intelligence. And also, yeah, this is the door to evil, or lower chakras is the numbness. It's the heart center is the most important thing. And for this time, for anyone who's listening who wants to go on a higher timeline, you have to feel the pain of yourself and others. Compassion is painful. Not turn your eyes away from the pain. That is, if you want to go on a better timeline, that's the way to do it. If you want to go to a worse timeline, close off your heart. Don't embrace the emotions. Yeah, any thoughts, Isaac?
No, hopefully said. That's sort of, yeah, that's the Pluto energy, I think, is confronting things which are uncomfortable. But I guess, just speaking personally, I had a like I went through that process throughout 2020 and 2021, and really sort of faced up to my own sort of the things which I was supposed to make myself, and then that just allowed me to find a level of compassion for people that I didn't sort of know I had. And yeah, it's sort of, and when we were talking about your thought yesterday, the way you described it was it was straight out of the Steiner, idea of like how our souls sort of evolve within the context of moving through certain physical experiences and having to really process these negative things. And that's a really a very definitive evolutionary step forward for us, and really the only real way we can make these leaps forward and raise our level of consciousness. So yeah, it was a very sort of a powerful sort of like moment when you came up with that.
Yeah, so everyone, please comment your thoughts in the comments. Support Lugal's World by becoming a member, a paid member, please. And have you ever wondered why you came to Earth? So the readers here will help you discover why you're here. What are you doing? Help us make more great content. Please hit the notification button, comment a lotus flower, comment a heart, a star, all the emojis on all videos. And enjoy. Please share this to your friends. If you want to spiritualize the earth, let's do it. Let's bring some power to our friends, enlighten them. If it's helped you, share it. Give back by spreading. Even if you can't afford getting a reading for yourself, then just share this video. Everyone have a magical midsummer, or whatever day you're watching this. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum.